But now I want your calls on this. Should all job interviews be face-to-face? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. The prison service has been told by the Prison Officers Union that it should stop using video calls as part of a recruitment process and should instead only hold face-to-face job interviews. Now, this comes after a series of instances where a person being hired has turned up to training and is unable to complete the tasks being asked of them. In one case, one person hired didn't have the ability to lock and unlock doors or restrain a prisoner due to a disability, which would have been visible had the recruiters met the person when they interviewed them in person. That's quite a specific case though, but what about when we widen it out to just other industries? Carole, do we think that all businesses should follow suit in the advice of the Prisons Union? All interviews should be done face-to-face.
Of course they should. I mean, you can't, you have to have someone in front of you because it says many different things about the person. You have to look into their face, you have to look into their eyes. You can tell someone's demeanour, you can tell how they present themselves in an interview, you can get from them how important this job is to them and whether they're sincere about that. And I think Zoom is a really lazy way to interview people. It started during COVID, and that's what we're doing now. And we're now hearing from the prison service that their officers are trained for 6 weeks. One of the reasons the prison service is in chaos is precisely because of this. They're interviewing people on Zoom who are actually physically disabled people, and they can't tell that when they're interviewing. So the person gets a job, and they're clearly not able to do that job. One guy had to be sacked recently because he got a job and he has cerebral palsy. So he had to
That was the case we were referring to. That is a very specific case.
Yeah, but if someone is sitting in a chair, you can't tell what they're capable of. So you have to meet them in person to see that. You cannot have disabled people working with violent prisoners who could hurt them.
Well, certain disabilities. There'll be certain disabilities that
well, okay, so let's classify certain disabilities. You cannot have people who are with certain physical disabilities working in a prison service and who are expected to control violent offenders. We also have a situation now where they're so inexperienced. What Mark Fairhurst, who was the prison union's boss, says is that now drones. He said it's not going to be long before drones start bringing in weapons. It's already happening. There was a story this week saying exactly that is happening. Weapons and drugs are being droned in, and even though there is equipment to stop those drones, it's not being used because there's no money.
But that's a criticism of the training as well as I suppose who they are hiring. But in cases where maybe you have 100 people apply for a job, you want to interview 50 of them, you're going to narrow that down to maybe 5 that you... Is there a time where actually online interviews have their place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a part of a wider process. I think the mistake there is that you can't go from online to straight have the job. I think it should take multiple interactions before you give anybody a job anyway. And I think
that sounds expensive.
Well, I think as a 1.0, doing Zoom is actually really time efficient and cost effective rather than necessarily lazy, because you can in 5 minutes, just from the content of what it is that they're saying, determine whether they'll be appropriate to move on to the next round. The next one should be in person, so you're able to get a much better context as to how they show up in the world, and that should give you an idea of then whether you go forward. So the fact that that particular stage of seeing them in person was not necessarily fulfilled is very much on the individual employer at that time and not necessarily about the overall process.
I wonder whether Zoom interviews are actually fair on the employee, the potential employee. I'm just thinking about times in my early career when I was staying in places that I may not have wanted to show off. You're giving your employer insight into your home. You're allowing them to see into your living room.
Well, I think
and perhaps you're going to be judged on that, on what you can afford when it might not be your aspiration.
Look, I think it's possible that those things can happen, those biases can occur, but what it is that there is opportunity for you to create a neutral environment for you to have that call, and there's also a chance for you to even necessarily turn off your camera if you choose to need to. I think the next stage
what's
afterwards...
the point in doing a Zoom call if you turn off your camera? And isn't that going to be more suspicious?
It's as consistent as what would happen historically with telephone interviews. That used to be the first stage, and that was really about the content of the things you had to say. Do you communicate well? Do you understand the job that's at hand? Now, qualifying that layer is a really important one from the 100 applicants that we hypothetically talked about. But the next step is you do want to see them not only in person, but you also want to see them in some form of context, talking about the role in some sort of structured way.
So actually, in that respect, you and Carole are kind of aligned that when you get to the final ends of recruitment, that actually you do need to be seen in person. arguably, that's exactly what happens in the prison service when they come to do the training. It's just perhaps training's a bit late for that. Alison from Edinburgh, what's your view on Zoom interviews?
Well, I'm actually a director in the care sector, and I've got quite strong views about it. We, as a third sector organisation, have taken a huge funding hit. We're a volunteer organisation. We don't get the funding we used to get. After COVID, we have had to save costs by getting rid of our offices and thus have hybrid working across our management teams and our administration staff. We don't have or can't afford the facilities to conduct one-to-one interviews. And that is a common theme right across the third sector, across the whole of England, Scotland and Wales. So therefore, we have no other option other than to do interviews on Zoom or Teams. Does it make a difference
though, Alison?
It doesn't make a difference because every organisation, no matter who you are, every organisation, no matter who you are, should
Your
have...
dog wants to say to you.
I know, she's having her say as well. She's feeling strongly about this too. Every organisation should actually have an induction process. So when someone starts their job, they should be inducted. At that point in the induction period, we get to know more about the individuals.
Well, I mean, I suppose that's what the prison service were doing in the terms of they were employing people, they were coming in, they were doing their training, which would be their sort of induction,
yes,
and discovering
exactly,
that many of the people that they've asked to come to do the training just aren't able to do the job. Carole, I mean, I know you're not for Zoom interviews at all, but do you think that they have their place when we're talking about an employer trying to whittle through 100 applications?
Said, it's a way to whittle down until you get to the final 5. But, I think that, what the lady was just talking about there, it's just not... How cost effective is it to not interview someone in person? Because if you take the wrong person on, it's very difficult to get rid of that person once they've been taken on, especially with the new employment laws that are coming. So it's vital that in a very important job like the care system and like the prison system, you get the right person for the job. What's been happening with the prison service, they've been getting corrupt people. I don't know how they haven't been able to check that out. They've been getting underqualified people. But, you see someone in person. I know 2 prison officers very well. And I look at them and know they were great prison officers, and one of them just...
They could handle a situation.
You know they can handle it. But I see some of the other guys going in, and I know they couldn't. And
just by walking through a door, you think walking into an interview room? All right.
Unfortunately, these are the biases that are apparent in these work environments, and you can't look at someone and make that determination. The whole point of the process... You're not just looking at them, you're talking to them. At the process, you have to go through and explore fairly. If we start repealing that progress that we've made and going into workplaces and saying, actually, rather than me just assume that you, as a woman, can't do this job because it requires you to be a bit rough, let me go find out for sure and know and actually base it on who you are and the content of your character. And so we've seemed to be moving away from that now, which I think is really problematic.
All right, we're going to have to move on after the break.